Ms. Zille. Firstly, your reaction to the findings by the Public Protector in this report?
Well, they totally misinterpret the law and the public service regulations, and I will be taking this finding on review. There was no Western Cape Education Department project that my son got. He was a teacher in Khayelitsha, running free workshops to prepare students, his students and other disadvantaged students, for the matric exam. And he borrowed tablets, that is, computer tablets, that were the property of the Western Cape Education Department to do that. And I supported him in that, as I would have supported any other teacher, and as I said in writing, needs to happen. That anybody wanting to do this needs to be able to borrow those tablets as well, and in fact that's precisely how I prevented the perception of a conflict of interests. So I believe that the Public Protector has got it completely wrong. If I was in the same situation today, I would do exactly the same thing again, because it was the right thing to do, and I will be taking the Public Protector's report on review.
If your son had not had access to you in the way that he had, simply because you are his mother, so what I'm asking here is that would any ordinary member of the public who would also want to offer the same kind of services he was offering, would they have had the same access to those tablets?
Well, the bottom line is that many people write to me on a regular basis, whether their drains are blocked, whether they need something or other. Now, that's why I sent out the letter saying, if any teacher wants to offer extra lessons and give up their holidays for free to do that for learners, they must be facilitated and supported in doing so. I've also supported many other IT initiatives in our schools for e-learning. Often the Western Cape government has paid them. They haven't paid my son at all. He was a teacher in Khayelitsha, volunteering his time to prepare not only his students but other students for matric. So I can tell you, if anybody else had wanted to do that, I would have supported them too.
Premier, it sounds like the issue that the Public Protector is raising here is not necessarily with the outcome or the intention of what your son wanted to do, but rather with the process through which he was able to gain access to these tablets. So was the District Department of Education involved in the procuring of these laptops? Were standard procedures or process that would involve those officials, was that followed? I think that's really what she's pointing to.
Absolutely, it was followed. And in fact, those tablets procured my son's project in any way at all. They were procured for something entirely different, and they would have sat gathering dust in a warehouse if he hadn't used them during the holidays.
Yes, but did you go to the district officials? So what I'm asking is there a paper trail from your son that begins with him approaching the relevant authorities and not approaching you as the Western Cape Premier, who also happens to be his mother? And do you have evidence of that paper trail?
Well, what I do have evidence of is that he went to speak to his principal in Khayelitsha and offered the workshops and was very gratefully received. He then asked his principal whether he could offer those workshops more broadly at other schools. He went to speak to those principals and they said, yes, please. He then went to check the digital platform in those other schools. It was not good enough. So he mentioned to me quite by accident one evening that he was going to have to cancel the workshops because the digital platform was not good enough. So I mentioned that to the DG in my meeting, and he reminded me, something I'd completely forgotten about, that the Western Cape Education Department had already ordered new tablets for programs of a very similar nature at the beginning of the fourth term. So all I did was ask whether they could be delivered at the beginning of the holidays rather than the end of the holidays. A 10-day difference.
Premier, by your own account, even over how this conversation had taken place with your son over dinner, does it not strike or stand out that he would not have been able to acquire those tablets without the fact that he has access to you as the Premier of the Western Cape?
That's absolutely right, but many, many other people also have access to me. They write to my email address, they send me WhatsApps.
Yes, but the same people don't have perhaps the privilege of then having you follow up with the Director General. And I imagine that also in the same conversation then comes the issue of a power here, because you are the Premier of the Western Cape. So when you ask about tablets, it's not just, especially from somebody who is your subordinate, I imagine that they don't just interpret it as you asking for the pure sake of asking.
The DG is not my subordinate. He is an advocate, and he would never knowingly let me do anything that violated the law. That's number one. Number two, the Public Service Commission in their code makes express provision for a congruence of interests. A congruence of interest is quite different from a conflict of interest. A conflict of interest arises when there is a conflict between my public position and my private position. That means I'm advancing my private position at the cost of my public position, normally with financial benefit attached. This was nothing of the kind. This was a congruence of interest. It was in the interest of the learners. It was in the interest of their matric examinations. It was in the interest of the government. It was in the interest of the Western Cape Education Department. It was a win-win-win situation. If you had to cancel every interaction between human beings that was a congruence of interests, we couldn't function as a society. There was no conflict of interests involved at all. It was a congruence of interests. And the law makes provision for that.
Let's take a look at what the Public Protector has had to say in her report. She says that you exposed yourself to a risk of conflict of interest between your official responsibilities and your private interests.
Number one, as I said right now, there was no conflict of interests. No one was winning as opposed to somebody losing. It was a win-win-win situation. No one was making any money. And because there may have been a perception, that's precisely why I wrote the letter to the DG and to the Minister of Education and to the head of IT education to say anybody who wants to offer workshops must get access, not only my son. So I managed that conflict of interest.
But was this something that was communicated widely to anybody else who may have wanted to run a similar project or had been in the process of running a similar project?
Well, I sent to the Public Protector all of the letters that I've written to people before and after supporting their interventions in schools in a whole range of different ways, thereby proving there was no favorable treatment of my son.
And what about the fact that also this has been found by the Public Protector that some of the work that your son did as a result of being able to procure these tablets has now effectively also formed part of what they include as their company's, repertoire, if I can put it that way, to show potential clients what it is that they have done?
Well, I do not know. I haven't seen him using that repertoire at all, but what I have seen is him raising huge amounts of money from private sources on his own to sponsor disadvantaged learners in mathematics. That is what I have seen. So it's a 100% good news story from his perspective, a total dedication to the learners.
And at no point do you see the fact that your role and your assistance and intervention in helping him set up, the services that he was providing under this NGO has perhaps resulted in how well it's been able to do?
The bottom line is this. I mentioned to the DG that he was going to cancel the workshops he was doing because there wasn't a digital platform. The DG's job has been to ensure that there is a digital platform that is sufficient because it is one of the province's game changers. He then mentioned to me that the tablets had already been ordered and the procurement had already been done. And then I asked him if they could be delivered at the beginning of the holidays rather than the end of the holidays. If that constitutes a conflict of interest, then the whole of government better close down.
And did you mention it, or did you instruct the DG on this issue?
I don't instruct the DG. The DG would never, ever allow me to do anything that he, as a lawyer, as an advocate, considered risky in law at all.
All right. That's how we're going to leave it for tonight. Thank you so much for your time.